What if forgiveness isn't as noble as you think? What if deep down, your act of letting go is just another way of keeping control? We were all raised on the same story, that forgiveness is freedom. That to forgive means you're evolved, spiritual, and compassionate. But what if that isn't the full truth? What if it's a carefully painted illusion, a moral performance to convince the world and yourself that you've moved on when you really haven't? Think about it. How many times have you said, "I forgive you," when inside, your chest was still burning? How many times have you smiled through the pain just to seem strong, mature, above it all? You tell yourself you're over it. But at night, the memory returns. The betrayal still echoes. The anger still lives somewhere deep, even if you've buried it under layers of calm. If forgiveness truly meant peace, why do you still feel heavy? Why do you still rehearse the argument in your head, wishing you'd said more? Wishing they'd understood? Maybe because forgiveness isn't always about peace. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's the ego's clever disguise, its way of saying, "Look how good I am. Look how untouched I remain." We call it virtue, but maybe it's vanity. A mask of goodness that hides resentment, pride, and the desperate need to stay in control. You forgive not to release them, but to prove you've already won. You let go, but secretly hope they notice how gracefully you did it. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And perhaps forgiveness, this social ritual of pretending to transcend pain, is one of the most beautiful ways we avoid the truth. Because maybe real forgiveness isn't light at all. Maybe it's born in darkness. Maybe it begins only when you stop pretending that you've already healed. Before we go deeper, take a moment. If this made something inside you pause, stay. Because what comes next might change how you see forgiveness forever. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I drop the next truth that might just wake you up. You've said it before. It's okay. I forgive you. The words leave your mouth like a sigh. You want to believe them. You want the weight to lift, the pain to vanish. But deep down, you know it hasn't. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't a release, it's an escape. A desperate attempt to move on before you've truly faced what broke you. We forgive because we're tired. Tired of the conflict. Tired of the noise. Tired of the chaos of emotion that keeps us awake at night. We tell ourselves it's better to forgive than to fight. Better to let it go than to feel the ache. But the truth is, what we call forgiveness often isn't forgiveness at all. It's exhaustion dressed as virtue. You say you're the bigger person. You smile, nod, move on. But days later, the bitterness creeps back in. You replay what happened. Every word, every look, every moment that left a scar. And beneath the calm exterior, something darker brews. You want to be over it, but you're not. Because what you offered wasn't forgiveness. It was avoidance. Sigmund Freud called it repression, the mind's way of pushing unbearable feelings into the shadows. Carl Jung took it even further. He believed that what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It hides in the unconscious, shaping our moods, our thoughts, our relationships, until one day it returns, disguised as fate. Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the ones we exile in the name of goodness. And that's what false forgiveness really is. A shadow pretending to be light. You convince yourself that you've let go, but what you've actually done is bury the anger, the betrayal, the grief, beneath the mask of moral superiority. You don't want to be seen as petty or vindictive. You want to be enlightened, so you perform it, this role of the peaceful forgiver. But inside, a quiet voice whispers, "I'm still hurt." Forgiveness becomes a performance, a social costume we wear to prove we're emotionally evolved. We post about it, talk about it, wear it like a medal of maturity. But deep down, we're still bleeding. We've confused pretending with healing. We've mistaken suppression for transcendence. And the world applauds us for it? They call you strong for not reacting, for taking the high road. But that praise only reinforces the lie that emotional silence is the same as inner peace. It isn't, because silence can be just another cage, a polished prison for the pain you refuse to face. Jung once wrote that the persona, the mask we show the world, is necessary, but dangerous. Without it, we can't function in society. But when we identify with it completely, we lose touch with the truth of who we are. You say you forgive because it fits the mask, because being the calm, composed one makes you feel safe, accepted, admired. But the more you cling to that image, the further you drift from the raw, unfiltered self that still wants to scream. Forgiveness then becomes an act of control. You think you're releasing the other person, but you're really trying to control the story, to rewrite it so that you come out unbroken. You forgive so you don't have to admit that you were powerless, that someone's actions truly hurt you. But denying your pain doesn't make you strong. It just makes your wounds quieter. This is why forgiveness can feel so heavy. Because it's not real. It's not coming from awareness, but from fear of seeming weak, fear of confronting rage, fear of losing control. And until you look that fear in the eye, you'll keep repeating the same cycle. Forgive too soon. Pretend you're fine. Resent in silence. Repeat. True forgiveness cannot exist in pretense. It requires truth. It demands that you acknowledge what happened without disguise, without performance, without the comfort of your persona. And that kind of honesty is terrifying. Because once you see it clearly, you can't go back to pretending. You can't unsee the shadow hiding behind your goodness. Maybe forgiveness isn't what you think it is. Maybe it's not about being good, or kind, or holy. Maybe it's about courage, the courage to face the parts of you that still want revenge. Because until you meet that side of yourself, you'll never be free. You'll keep forgiving in words, but not in truth. So ask yourself now, who are you really forgiving? Them or yourself for still feeling angry after all this time? If what you've heard so far makes sense, if you've ever felt the weight of pretending to be okay, then stay. Because the next part will take you deeper. We'll talk about why some forgiveness isn't kindness at all, but strategy. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you'll be the first to know when we dive into the dark philosophy of strategic forgiveness. What if forgiveness isn't an act of grace at all, but a form of strategy? What if the words, "I forgive you," are sometimes the most elegant way to reclaim power without ever raising your voice? There's a kind of forgiveness that doesn't come from the heart. It comes from calculation, from instinct, from the deep, almost primal awareness that mercy can be a weapon more devastating than revenge. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology ever gave it language. He wrote, "Men should either be crushed or forgiven. The injury must be such that one cannot fear revenge." In his world, forgiveness wasn't a moral ideal, it was a tactic. A way to neutralize your enemy without drawing blood. Because when you forgive strategically, you appear merciful, even righteous, but underneath, you're disarming the other person's power over you. You're rewriting the narrative. And isn't that what most of us really want after being hurt? Control. The ability to shape the story, to rise above, to prove that the wound didn't define us. So we forgive not to free the other, but to reclaim our dominance in silence. We turn the other cheek, not because we've transcended pain, but because we've learned how to hide it behind elegance. But this kind of forgiveness carries a dangerous illusion. Because even though you appear powerful, your peace still depends on the existence of an enemy. Your calm is only meaningful if someone once disturbed it. And in that way, you're still tied to them. Still reacting, still bound by what they did. Nietzsche saw this clearly when he dismantled the morality of forgiveness in Christian culture. He believed that much of what we call virtue is actually weakness wearing a halo. That moral goodness is often a way for the powerless to feel powerful, to justify their suffering by pretending it makes them righteous. He wrote about resentment, the hidden resentment that turns pain into morality. When you can't strike back, you convince yourself that you're superior for not doing so. That's how moral systems are born. And that's how strategic forgiveness often disguises itself as enlightenment. You say, "I forgive because I'm above it." But what you really mean is, "I forgive because I can't win any other way." You turn virtue into armor. Your calm becomes a fortress, and your silence a sword. But here's the paradox Jung would warn about. Everything you suppress in the name of light will eventually return as shadow. The forgiveness you give for appearance's sake, the forgiveness that hides rage, grief, humiliation, doesn't dissolve. It mutates. It seeps into your tone, your choices, your dreams. It becomes sarcasm, detachment, numbness. And one day, it explodes misdirected, misunderstood at someone who doesn't deserve it. Jung taught that the psyche seeks wholeness, not comfort. And that means it will expose every false piece you try to create. If forgiveness isn't real, your mind will know. Your body will know. Your heart will whisper, "I'm still angry," long after your mouth says, "I've moved on." Strategic forgiveness is seductive because it works. It gives you dignity when chaos tries to drag you down. It lets you walk away with your head high. But it also feeds the ego's oldest addiction, the need to appear untouchable, the need to win even in surrender. Machiavelli's logic had a dark brilliance to it. He saw that people fear humiliation more than death. So forgiveness became a tool to make others indebted, to make them feel small in the face of your supposed greatness. "Look how generous I am," the ego whispers. But beneath that superiority lies fragility, the quiet terror of admitting that you were once powerless. And maybe that's the real dark truth about strategic forgiveness. It's not about love. It's not about compassion. It's about survival. The mind's way of pretending it's healed when it's simply reorganized the pain into something beautiful and socially acceptable. So how do you know when your forgiveness is genuine or strategic? Ask yourself this: if the person who hurt you never apologizes, never changes, never even acknowledges your pain, can you still forgive? If your answer depends on their behavior, your forgiveness is still a transaction, a negotiation of control. But if you can let go without needing anything in return, not even recognition, then your forgiveness has finally stepped out of strategy and into truth. Carl Jung once said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To truly forgive, you must first see your darkness, the pride that hides under kindness, the resentment that wears the mask of morality. Only when you confront that will forgiveness stop being a weapon and start being freedom. If this reflection resonates, stay with me. Because next, we'll look at how these patterns play out in real life, how strategic forgiveness shapes relationships, power, and even love. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell asterisk, so you'll be the first to see when the next truth arrives. Let's leave theory for a moment. Let's look at the world. Because strategic forgiveness isn't an abstract idea, it's everywhere. In relationships, in families, in workplaces. Even in the quiet conversations you have with yourself before bed. Think of the friend who hurt you. They betrayed your trust, broke a promise, or said something cruel. You told them you forgave them. You even hugged, smiled, and swore that everything was fine. But part of you knew it wasn't, because from that moment on, the dynamic changed. You stopped being equal. You became the one who rose above. And whether you admitted it or not, that gave you a strange sense of control. Every time they spoke, every time they tried to justify themselves, you had the quiet power of moral superiority. You were the one who forgave. They were the ones who owed. That's what makes strategic forgiveness so intoxicating. It doesn't just heal the wound, it rewrites the hierarchy. You get to be the enlightened one while they're stuck in guilt. It feels righteous, but beneath that righteousness is ego in its purest form. I've seen this play out in relationships that look perfect on the surface. A partner cheats, lies, or disappears emotionally. The other partner says, "I forgive you." Tears are shed, promises made, new beginnings declared. But months later, in every argument, that old wound is quietly reintroduced. Not shouted, not screamed, just subtly implied. "Remember what you did? Remember how I forgave you?" It becomes a weapon of moral leverage, a way to win without appearing cruel. That's not forgiveness. That's bookkeeping. Emotional debt disguised as compassion. And sooner or later, it poisons everything. In workplaces, it looks different but feels the same. A boss humiliates an employee in front of others. Later, they apologize. The employee smiles and says, "It's okay, I understand." But deep down, they don't forgive, they adapt. They learn to play the game, to act cooperatively while secretly withdrawing their loyalty. They don't retaliate openly. They wait, and when the right opportunity comes, a better offer, a quiet moment of justice, they take it. Not out of malice, but balance. The system taught them that open emotion is weakness, so forgiveness became their camouflage. Even between parents and children, this silent transaction unfolds. A father who never apologized for his temper. A mother who made love conditional on obedience. You grow up, tell yourself you forgive them. You say you've let it go. But notice how your voice still trembles when you talk about childhood. Notice how easily old fears return when you're back in their presence. That isn't forgiveness, it's survival. You learn to adapt, to bury the anger under politeness. You forgave them, not because you were free, but because you couldn't afford to stay angry. Carl Jung believed that these buried emotions don't die. They live inside you, shaping the way you love, trust, and connect. When you haven't truly forgiven, you project your unhealed pain onto new people, new stories. You find yourself forgiving again and again, not because others keep hurting you, but because you keep reenacting the same wound through different faces. There's also the forgiveness we give ourselves, and that might be the hardest of all. Think of the things you've done that you still regret. The moments you hurt someone, the times you betray your own values. You've told yourself, "I forgive myself," but every time you try to rest, a quiet guilt rises like smoke. That's the shadow reminding you, the words mean nothing without truth. You can't forgive what you haven't faced. You can't release what you still hide. Strategic forgiveness in all these forms keeps us emotionally functional, but spiritually fragmented. It allows us to keep moving, to appear sane, to look good. But it doesn't transform us. It only manages perception. And as long as perception is more important than truth, we'll keep mistaking control for peace. Yet, there's something strangely human about it. We forgive strategically because we're afraid to feel powerless again. We'd rather dominate emotionally than surrender honestly. And that's why this dark truth isn't just cynical, it's compassionate. It asks us to see our manipulation not as evil, but as pain misunderstood, a defense mechanism, a scar that still remembers the wound. Real forgiveness doesn't emerge from control. It begins when control collapses, when you stop performing peace and start sitting in the discomfort of what's real. It begins when you let the pain speak, without editing, without justifying, without pretending to be wise. Only then does forgiveness stop being a strategy and start being a form of awakening. If you've seen yourself somewhere in these stories, don't run from it. It's not judgment, it's clarity. And that clarity is the first step toward real freedom. Before we go deeper into what true forgiveness actually looks like, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell asterisk. Because what comes next isn't about strategy, it's about truth. And truth has the power to set you free in ways comfort never will. There's a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when you finally realize that forgiveness isn't about them. It never was. It's about you. About the energy you've wasted carrying what's already gone. About the version of yourself that stayed stuck in that moment of pain, looping endlessly between anger and pretense. Real forgiveness begins the day you stop performing it. When the mask drops. When you stop trying to look healed and start daring to feel what's real. It's not pretty. It's not spiritual fireworks or gentle peace. It's messy. It's tears that come without warning. It's shaking hands, clenched jaws, the sound of your own heart admitting, "I'm still hurt." But in that moment of honesty, something extraordinary happens. You start to wake up. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Forgiveness, in its truest form, is exactly that. It's not imagining light. It's entering the dark room of your soul and lighting a candle, not to erase the shadows, but to finally see them. It's realizing that every emotion you tried to suppress, anger, grief, shame, wasn't your enemy. It was a message. It was your unconscious calling you home. To truly forgive, you must first face what you've hidden from yourself. You must confront the child in you who still feels unsafe, the lover in you who still aches to be understood, the friend in you who still wants to be seen. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. It's saying, "Yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. But I choose not to live there anymore." It's not an act of kindness. It's an act of awareness. It's looking at your pain with open eyes and refusing to let it dictate who you are. It's saying, "This is part of me, but it no longer defines me." And that's when the shift begins, not outside, but inside. You start to notice how much energy you've been giving away. How much of your identity has been built around stories of betrayal and injustice. You realize that the world doesn't owe you closure, that sometimes the apology will never come. And yet, you can still be free. Because freedom doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. Jung believed that the human journey is toward wholeness, not perfection. That means forgiveness isn't a final state, it's a process of integration. You integrate the part of you that hates, the part that judges, the part that still longs for revenge. You stop trying to destroy the darkness and instead bring it into dialogue. Because when the light and shadow begin to speak to each other, something sacred emerges. Peace that isn't borrowed from illusion, but born from truth. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your power from it. It's about choosing presence over pain. Choosing growth over guilt. And that choice doesn't happen once. It happens every day. Each time the memory resurfaces. Each time you want to reopen the wound. Each time you catch yourself whispering, "They don't deserve forgiveness." You remind yourself, "I'm not doing it for them." You forgive because holding on costs too much. Because your peace is worth more than your pride. Because you've finally understood that carrying resentment doesn't punish the other, it only keeps you imprisoned in the same moment that broke you. Real forgiveness feels less like letting go and more like letting be. You stop fighting what happened. You stop rewriting it. You simply allow it to exist as part of your story, a chapter, not the whole book. And when you reach that point, something inside you shifts. The tension eases. The bitterness softens. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer crave validation. Because you finally understand, forgiveness was never about justice. It was about liberation. The more you grow, the more you see that life will never give you perfect endings. But it will give you the chance to end your suffering by facing it. By acknowledging that you cannot change what was done, but you can choose what it means. And that's where true power begins. So don't forgive to appear evolved. Don't forgive to look kind or enlightened. Forgive when you no longer need the story. When the memory no longer controls your heartbeat. When you can look back and see not a villain, but a teacher. When you realize that the one who hurt you also carried their own wounds, their own shadows, their own blindness. That realization doesn't justify what they did. It frees you from having to hold it anymore. That's the beginning of wholeness. Not forgetting, not pretending, but accepting the complexity of being human. And that's where real forgiveness lives. If you've felt that quiet shift inside you while listening, hold on to it. That's the sound of awakening. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell asterisk, because what comes next is the conclusion of this journey, the truth that ties it all together. And you'll want to hear it while your heart is still open. Forgiveness isn't about others. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned in pain. The parts that stayed frozen in the moment you were hurt. The parts that stopped trusting, stopped hoping, stopped feeling safe. The dark truth is this: you don't forgive to heal them. You forgive to stop bleeding. You forgive to stop reliving the same story every day of your life. Most people think forgiveness is an act of kindness, something gentle, something noble. But real forgiveness is brutal. It tears away your illusions. It shows you how much of your suffering was self-created, how long you've been feeding the memory of what broke you. And when you finally let go, it doesn't feel like peace at first. It feels like a loss. Like standing in an empty room after a storm, realizing that the chaos is gone, but so is the noise that kept you company. Forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's remembering without needing revenge. It's looking at the person who hurt you, whether they're in front of you or just living in your mind, no longer feeling that burning pull to make them understand. Because you've already understood. You've seen what they couldn't see. You've accepted what they refused to face. And that's what makes you free. When you stop trying to prove you've moved on, you finally do. When you stop waiting for an apology, you stop waiting for your life to begin. Forgiveness is not about rewriting the past. It's about reclaiming your power in the present. It's choosing not to let pain become your personality. It's saying, yes, I was broken, but I am no longer defined by what broke me. Carl Jung believed that every act of consciousness, every moment we see something we once denied, brings us closer to the self, to wholeness. So when you forgive, not because you're told to, not because it looks good, but because you've faced your darkness and made peace with it, that's when you become whole. That's when forgiveness stops being a concept and becomes a state of being. The world tells you that to forgive is to release the other person. But the truth is, you were the prisoner all along. You held the key. And all this time, you thought it belonged to them. So now the choice is yours. You can keep holding the story, nurturing the pain, polishing it into identity. Or you can set it down, walk away. Not in defiance, but in quiet acceptance. Because the real power isn't in proving your worth. It's no longer needed to. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying, what you did was okay. It means saying, I no longer need what you did to make sense for me to be whole. That's maturity. That's freedom. That's peace. And in that moment, when your heart unclenches, when your breath feels lighter, when the past finally stops echoing, you'll realize something profound. Forgiveness wasn't a gift you gave them. It was a homecoming. A return to yourself. A sacred act of remembering who you were before the world taught you to close your heart. You'll look back and see that everything, even the pain, was part of your becoming. And that maybe the darkness didn't destroy you, it refined you. If this message reached you, if it stirred something you can't quite name, stay with it. Don't rush to label it. Don't escape the feeling. That discomfort you feel, that's your soul stretching. That's growth. And before you go, if you felt this message resonate, if it opens something in you, like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because this journey of awakening doesn't end here. Every week, we go deeper into the truths that the world hides behind comfort. Leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this message spoke to you the most, and what lesson you're taking with you. Because your reflection might be the light someone else needs to see.